Welcome back, guys. This is the second part of agriculture video for Prelims 2022. If you haven't watched the first part with respect to inputs, where I've clubbed all the current affairs and basics which are relevant for the Prelims 2022 exam in roughly about 22 minutes, I request you to go back and watch it. Now, coming to the output part. Predominantly, we will be dealing with the economic angle of marketing here. Let's understand a logic. In any business, if you have to see a profit, the input cost should be less than the output price. This is common sense, right? And imagine if you have to sustain that kind of a lifestyle, it should always beat the inflation. That is, the output revenue or the profit you generate should beat inflation, and only then it is considered sustainable. Let us apply the same logic to the agricultural sector and see how it is faring. So, if we want to help the farmers, let us understand the economic angle of that. Now you have the input side and the output side. So as far as inputs are considered, you have to reduce the input cost, that is the amount spent on inputs in a agricultural system, or in other words, the raw materials required for any industry. Similarly, profit maximization should be the objective of any business. The same angle should apply here also. Now as far as agricultural income is concerned, we have to focus on cash crops, or we have to focus on increasing our exports to those destinations which require these exports. This is the logic here. But is it really happening in our agriculture? Not really. Why? Let us understand. Firstly, India is a very big country, and therefore for that reason we have this problem of food security. If we can't meet our domestic demand, forget the exports. So this is the main problem. So it is very obvious, because of the political costs involved and also the welfare angle involved, there will be heavy government regulation in this sector. What is the other way in which we can help our farmers? The other one is scientific angle apart from the economic angle. So we have extension services, the application of information communication technology, artificial intelligence, and all the latest technologies like Internet of Things, which can improve the efficiency both on the input side, that is application of inputs, and also maximum value extraction on output side. So this is the other segment, but predominantly in this video we'll be focusing on this economic angle only. If we take a look at the central problem, even in 2022, 17 to 20% of the GDP comes from agriculture, but that is not the problem. It is a decline from 1950, where 50% of GDP came from agriculture. That is not the real problem. The real problem is, in the small value, 45% of the population is dependent. So agricultural growth is must for inclusive growth, otherwise there will be severe inequality. This is the first social problem. But why is the government not able to do this? Because the government has traditionally given priority to food security of our country when considered to making agriculture a solid business. And government is right in its own way, because of the experience we have had with famines. Like, say for example, in 1943 there was a famine in Bengal. This Bengal famine has actually killed millions, and this is not a scenario which any government across the world would want to see. Therefore, there are some justifications that government wants to support food security for our country, and it is for the same reason government has come up with a national food security mission which focuses on increasing production in certain commodities. What are those commodities? Rice, wheat, oil seeds, and it also includes commercial crops. Even though we are talking about food security, it also includes commercial crops. Just remember this point. But that is not a problem, because of certain mechanisms and also the threats which are posed by climate change. It is becoming a problem. Now, supply side constraints, like say for example the latest Ukraine war, we are heavily dependent on Russia and Ukraine for our sunflower oil. I mean, like, it is one of the major oil that is consumed in southern part of the country. After that, we are exporting rice and other water intensive crops. So there will be a water stress in the future because of the environmental changes that are undergoing in our environment. Thirdly, the average land holding size is coming down. Like 86% of India's farmers are small and marginal farmers. So it is difficult to scale up productivity in such a scenario. when the government wants to focus on food security, it should also incentivize the farmers, otherwise it would be not sustainable. Now, what kind of support is extended by the government forms the understanding and the questions that are asked in the economic angle of our agricultural systems. What kind of support is being extended? There are various technology missions, various government schemes. Like, say, for example, the present issue is about oil seeds. We import more than 50% of our edible oil needs, and therefore there is one sub scheme under this National Food Security Mission called the National Mission on Oil Seeds and Oil Palm. This was again in news, and there was a demand that the production under this scheme should be encouraged to reduce the import dependency. Recently, Indonesia also introduced a ban on palm oil exports because they were not able to meet their own country's domestic need. So we don't want to have this kind of supply volatility. India being such a diverse agroeconomic zone, it is a matter of just political will and structural reforms to reduce this kind of import dependency. So this is the food security angle and the National Food Security Mission. But what are the measures taken which has distorted the market? Let us understand. How will the government ensure production? The primary tool used is minimum support price. This is a minimum guarantee for farmers. Let's say a farmer produces rice and wheat. So he should not be worrying as to how he will sell this. Normally, what happens in a normal industry is after it is manufactured, it is taken to the market, and from market it is distributed to various other distributors, and further it reaches to the retail markets and our homes. But when it comes to agriculture, you have to realize that 86% of the farmers are small and marginal farmers, and they cannot bear the cost of this marketing and other logistic support that is needed to realize that price. So keeping this in mind, the government ensures that a minimum support price is what they would get, something that is over their cost of production. We'll get back to that later. However, you have to remember that there is no legal backing. This is just an indication by the government that you don't have to worry, there is some minimum support for you. Secondly, it can't force the private players to buy at that price, because that is not how free market economy works. Now, let's come back to the concepts. An agriculture year is between the 1st of July and 30th of June the next year. Within that year, there are two seasons, Kharif, that is summer, and Rabi, that is winter. So when the plants are planted and they're harvested, the marketing season begins for Kharif from 1st October and for Rabi from 1st April. So every year before the season itself, that is the sowing itself, before the sowing itself, this MSP prices are announced by the government. Based on these announcements, farmers can decide what to produce. Now these prices are recommended by an organization which is not a statutory body, and that organization is Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices, which is under Ministry of Agriculture. So this is just recommending, but final authority to approve this CSEP recommendations is under the Cabinet Committee of Economic Affairs. Just remember this, a lot of questions were asked from this area. How will CSEP determine this MSP price? There are certain terms of references. So these are the references. But you have to remember two important points to eliminate options. So the first one is farmers' concerns are taken into account, but not just those concerns. You can have a look at the 7th point. Even consumers' welfare is also taken into consideration before determining the price. So MSP will also have consumer interest in this way. So you have to understand that cost of production, which is just one of the factor, is a part of MSP, not the only factor, because that is not how the practical world works. Just remember these important points. So we have seen 7 factors for the determination of MSP, and one of them is cost of production. Now what exactly is this cost of production and how is it calculated? What are the 3 associated concepts? 1. Directly you are just taking into consideration the input costs, like the hired labor, fuel, irrigation costs, seed cost, fertilizer cost, etc. But there is a shortcoming in this approach. Like in this case, A2 plus FL case, the cost of unpaid family labor is also included. Now what does this mean? Imagine in a joint family, all the members are involved in farming. If they were not involved in farming, they would be doing some job, they would be earning some income. They are giving their time here. That is not calculated, and if that is not calculated, it is unfair because they would have earned some extra money elsewhere. So the government wants to include this family labor cost also, unpaid family labor, and government decided that the MSP would be over 50% over this A2 plus FL component. But farmers were demanding another cost of production calculation called C2. What is the C2? Over and above this A2 plus FL, let's say if the farmers are having their own land. Now, if this land is utilized for something else, let's say for example they are giving it on a lease to an industry, they would be getting some rental yield, or there will be some fixed capital assets which are being a part of this. That is not calculated, right? So farmers want C2 to be the basis for MSP calculation, but that is not possible as declared by the government. Right now we are focusing on A2 plus FL. Another interesting point, how many crops are notified by the government for MSP? A lot of confusion is there regarding this. Therefore, I have directly gone to the government documents, and this is an extract for you. So, government announces minimum support prices for 25 major agricultural commodities. Now, why is the confusion? Some newspapers say 23, some say 22. Let me explain. 25 crops get MSP. This is given and understood. Now, let us understand what organizations are involved in declaring this MSPs. So, firstly, as we have already discussed, we have CACP, which is mandated with coming up with recommendations for as many as 22 crops. Now, what are those 22 crops? You have 14 Kharif crops, 6 Rabi crops, and most importantly, there are 2 agricultural commercial crops as well, namely jute and copra. Now, in your geography syllabus, the conditions in which Kharif and Rabi crops grows and the commercial crops grows is very important. I hope you have revised that thoroughly. And apart from this 22 crops, there are 3 more crops, but it is not declared by CACP. For these 3 crops, we have the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution. So they recommend the prices. What are the prices? Firstly, we have the FRP. This is for sugarcane. Now, how does this work? Instead of directly giving money to the farmers, what happens is a price is determined by the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, and sugar mill owners are supposed to pay this price, and it is mandatory. Why is it made mandatory? Because the Sugarcane Control Order in 1966 said so, and this is based on the Essential Commodities Act. This is to ensure that sugarcane farmers are not exploited. This is one fact. The other 2 commodities which are mostly ignored is Thoria, that is in Punjab we know this as sarson. So this is one of the major source of oil, edible oil. And then finally we have dehusked coconut, which is again determined by MCF only, that is Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution. So I hope this makes it very clear. MSP is given for 25 crops, and out of those 25, 22 crops price is determined or recommended by CACP. Yes, the government announces MSP, but it does not mean that it will also procure everything that the farmer produces. Only select crops like wheat, rice, cotton, sugarcane, pulses are procured by various central government agencies. But this has twofold effect. One, environmental, because these crops are very water intensive. So water stress is being created. They are heavily skewed towards these crops even in areas where there is no water. Let's say for example Marathwada region. Secondly, land degradation is happening at a very rapid pace, because we have seen that high yielding varieties require a lot of inputs like fertilizers, and that will degrade the quality of soil, because there is absolutely no time for giving the land some rest and let it replenish. The second issue, it's an economic issue. There is a corruption allegation with respect to FCI, that is the Food Corporation of India. Now, what is this Food Corporation of India? What are the allegations? What is its mandate? Let us have a look. So before going to FCI, let us understand the major issue with MSP. There is a committee called the Shanta Kumar Committee in 2015. It said that only 6% of the farmers were aware about MSP's facility. So, why is the government supporting MSP and why is it heavily skewed towards particular crops? For this, you have to understand the importance of National Food Security Act, which says that nearly 67% of the population would get subsidized rice and wheat and also some other coarse cereals in localized pockets, but majority of the country consumes rice and wheat. So, according to this National Food Security Act, FCI, that is Food Corporation of India, which was created way back in the 60s, was given the mandate to procure the crops. Now it can happen in two ways. FCI can directly go to the farmers through its wide elaborate network or take the help of certain state government agencies and procure it. FCI will pay for that. Or there can be a decentralized procurement where FCI is directly bypassed and center will say states should procure the produce and center will pay the money for states. So whatever is procured will be put in a central pool. This central pool is the buffer that is available with us for our food security and it is maintained by FCI. So for procuring all this above and over MSP, certain costs will be incurred by the government and in this case FCI. That cost is called the economic cost. Now when you distribute that to the states, they have to cover the salary component and other operating expenditure, so they will slightly increase that price and give it to the states. So the cost at which states get this produce or the central pool of food grains for NFSA purpose is called the central issue price. Now this price is actually regulated by the Department of Food and Public Distribution. This is under Ministry of Consumer Affairs. Now going back to the intricate details. Now when we say that there are certain economic costs, not only do we have acquisition costs, we also have distribution cost. All that is a part of FCI's economic cost. Acquisition cost means over and above MSP. Sometimes FCI has to pay to the logistics cost or third party commissions like Arhitiyas, middlemen. All that will be acquisition cost, and also the storage cost and the transportation cost for taking from the godowns to the state level departments again will constitute distribution cost. So if we have to talk about subsidies, consumer subsidy means the difference between CIP, that is the price at which states get, and the economic cost of FCI. This is nothing but consumer subsidy. But apart from this, you also have to remember that FCI maintains buffer stocks. That is, let's say in next year, if the production is bad, so they should have some backup. That backup is called buffer stock. And the cost for that is called buffer subsidy, which is again borne by the central government. So FCI's component of consumer subsidy and the buffer subsidy together costs government something. That is the total food subsidy bill of the government. This issue of food subsidy was already discussed. I'll be pasting the link of that video from the economy crash course in the description box below. Now, this cost is borne both by the center and states. It is not important to remember how much, but just know that center has disproportionately higher contribution towards bearing this subsidy. Now, there are a lot of articles on the functioning of FCI, that it is maintaining more than the required buffer stock, and there is a loss of 50,000 crores annually because of the rotting food grains in our system. We can use that to better use. We can probably encourage market mechanism and export it also. And even if FCI wants to export it, there will be a lot of issue because of the quality of storage, which is very poor. And even if we want to export, the WTO food subsidy norms will not allow us to support the exports at a cost competitive price in the international markets. Secondly, recently I've made a video about parboiled rice, the controversy surrounding the parboiled rice of Telangana. This is a classic example where MSP is creating a market distortion. Now there is no demand for parboiled rice in our country, and even if there is any small demand, it is actually produced locally now. Therefore, the central government denied taking the Telangana farmers parboiled rice. Now it became a very political issue, but the real suffering will be faced by the farmers. So the Telangana government stepped in to procure the entire produce. But what will be done with it is a different question. We don't know. So MSP, we can say, is a structural issue now in our economy. It is not a issue of price, or it is not a economic issue anymore. It is a structural issue. So because of this, MSP is considered to distort the markets, and it is not addressing the needs of the market. Lack of diversity within the items procured using MSP. Let's say, for example, oil seeds production is not being met in our country, and pulses production is sometimes very erratic. We have to import from African countries like Madagascar, etc. So this is all about increasing the output costs, but this is not functioning. So the government wanted to find out any other way that will help the market. So they came up with this scheme called PM AASHA, which has 3 different components. Now what happens here? One, you have the price support scheme, where there are certain organizations which will procure the often less procured crops, like say for example pulses, oil seeds, copra. These will be procured by the central agencies, and the notified agencies here are NAFED and again FCI. Again, this became a controversy because FCI is not known for its efficiency in handling food. Food management has been a big problem for FCI. So the entire cost will be borne by the center. Second component is the price deficiency payment. Now here you have to understand that oil seeds is always in demand, because we are importing most of the oil, and if the farmer produces oil seeds, they will definitely get a price. At least a minimum support price will be ensured. But usually when there are no corporates, it becomes a very risky business, because the farmer has to find a market, or he has to incur a lot of cost in transporting it. Sometimes it can happen that they might not recover that MSP also. So what happens is, instead of directly going for physical procurement, government has ensured that it will support the market in a different way. Say there are some pre-registered farmers in a portal. When the prices of the crops of those pre-registered farmers fall below MSP, the government will support them. That is when the private demand is not met, or the private players are not able to pay the price. That is when they come into the picture. Usually oil seeds are traded well above MSP. So this is a very rare scenario. The third initiative is to encourage private participation. Now you know that through APMCs, most of the produce is actually taken up by the government itself. Now APMC stands for Agricultural Produce Market Committees, and these are heavily regulated by the state governments. And because of this, private players are not really interested in the local trade. But it can happen that private players might want to trade in this as well. That increases competition, and therefore more prices for the farmers also. But the problem is, because of politicization at local level, private players are not really participating. So that is a different issue. Now if to encourage private players, government wants to come up with a scheme, this is an example. So it still declares MSP, and if there is a difference in market price, and if the farmers are not getting the required price, minimum at MSP, if the private player pays up, out of that cost, up to 15% of whatever is the deficit. Let's say for example, if MSP is 100 rupees and the market price is actually 85 rupees, so this 15 rupees difference is actually borne by the government through this scheme. Of course, these schemes were not so successful. So till now we have seen the measures taken by the government with respect to the farmer side, that is increasing their revenue. Now what about the consumer? It so happens that every season you see volatility in the prices of certain commodities. Like before the pandemic in 2019, we have seen onions touching even 200 rupees. And there are certain pulses also, let's say tur dal or other pulses in 2018 touched as high as 200 rupees. So in order to contain this volatility, there is a price stabilization fund which was created to safeguard the consumers. So what happens is this fund is actually maintained by the central government, and certain state governments will be given interest free loans to reduce the prices. Now this fund is managed by an organization called Small Farmers Agribusiness Consortium, and the ministry which is considered the nodal agency for this is Consumer Affairs Ministry. Previously it was with Agriculture Ministry, now it is transferred to this ministry. Now you have to remember, there is another point from current affairs, like this was in news for a while now, Operation Green. Is this the same as price stabilization fund? It might seem like, but there are certain differences. What is Operation Green? In order to contain the volatility of tomato, onion and potato prices, a scheme was launched by the Ministry of Food Processing, whereas this scheme was actually by Consumer Affairs. So this is by Ministry of Food Processing, which has two components: short term component, long term component. Now this short term component is again handled by NAFED. So it will pay some subsidy for the transport and storage of tomatoes, onions and potatoes, which are the most consumed vegetables in our economy. They do not have MSP. So apart from the short term component, there is also a long term component where integrated value chains like creation of cold storages etc. is encouraged through various financial incentives. It is not important to go into the details. So just remember the difference in the approach. One is for price stabilization, the other one is also for price stabilization, but the modus operandi is a bit different. We are focused more on reducing the costs involved in the final price determination of these commodities. So this agricultural income augmentation activity is just focused on output side. That is, we are trying to give direct support to the farmers, but that is distorting the structure of the market, as you've seen in the case of MSP. To address that, if we actually move to the other side, that is give input side support, what is the effect? Let us see. Input support means you're directly giving money to the farmer. The idea actually gained prominence when the Telangana government, through a scheme called the Raitu Bandhu, it started directly giving money to the farmers. How much? 5,000 per acre for every season, that is 2 times. So in total they are getting 10,000 per acre. Here land is the unit, please remember this. Of course there are certain exceptions, like commercial farmers are not given this, and those who rented their land to the farmers, they are also not getting it. The controversy here is landless farmers and tenant farmers are ignored. This is Telangana's Raitu Bandhu, and also I would request you to see Odisha's Kalia scheme, which is also in similar lines. At a central level, there is a small difference here, but more or less the logic applied is same. Input support. Here, there is a scheme called PM Kisan, and 100% of this scheme is actually funded by the government of India. What happens here is, in 3 installments, every farmer family, please note this, here it is the land, here it is family. Now what is the definition of a family? A husband, his wife and their minor kids. They are included in the family's definition. So every such family which is identified by the states, usually most of the states are using Aadhaar as the basis for identifying the beneficiaries, and certain other parameters are also concerned. States will identify and give the center a list. All those people through direct benefit transfer will get this funds directly into their bank accounts. So of course Aadhaar is mandatory to avail these benefits. Now what is the positive angle? There is no market distortion, like only for MSP or any other incentive given by the government, farmers will not produce, even if it is not supported by the local conditions. Let's say for example, you can't expect rice cultivation in dry areas, but farmers are not having any other option previously, because that is the only way they can ensure minimum return. No market distortion. The other fact which is the positive aspect is, it is given unconditionally. It is not like the farmer has to definitely produce something. just by the mere fact of that person being identified as a farmer and meeting the required conditions, whether the fact that he's producing it or not, he will get this money. So it will support us income in a way. Of course, there are certain concerns that it will increase the inflation, but it is usually not so inflationary when compared to the other issues like leakages of agricultural subsidy or the inputs being misutilized, etc., etc. So this is the entire business angle of agriculture. So in this video, we have seen the economic angle, how to increase revenue for a farmer. You either have to reduce the input cost or increase the output revenue. This is the economic angle. But what about the efficiency angle? Can't we use our resources better when we're talking about inputs? There are a lot of problems like fertilizer misutilization, water misutilization, power misutilization. And the answer for this efficiency angle will definitely come from science and technology. There is a concept called incremental capital output ratio. That is the investment required for additional unit output in a sector. And this is clearly linked to science and technology. Better is the technology, better is the efficiency. So this understanding of science and technology means that we have to focus on R&D towards environmental sustainability. So on the input side, we'll be talking about resource optimization, and on the output side, we will be talking about using technology for maximum value extraction. If you want that video also, I would request you to please post it in the comments so that I understand your requirements and post it accordingly. That's it for now. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you.